Good evening and welcome to the Canadian Anti-Semitism Education Foundation's presentation on judicial reform and other legal issues challenging Israel with our special guest, Yotam Eyal. I'm Andrea Spindle, Executive Director of CAEF, and it's my pleasure to thank our co-sponsors of this program, which is being live streamed to people across North America. And special thanks to Beth Tikva Synagogue for hosting us this evening. Thanks to the many organizations which actively and frequently support our programs as we work to increase public awareness about anti-Semitism and educate people about Israel's rights, to build Jewish pride and to end Jew hatred. We thank the Ludger Center Congregation, End Jew Hatred Canada, the Israel Committee of Sonoma County, Stand With Us Canada, the Lawfare Project, European Lawyers for Israel, Americans for a Safe Israel, the Mattathias Project, the Canadian Institute for Jewish Research, Teach, International Christian Embassy Jerusalem, Israel Forever Foundation, Canadians for Israel's Legal Rights, Campaign for Truth, the Atlanta Israel Coalition, Allied Voices for Israel, Israel Independence Fund, and the Stronger Together Conference Fighting to End Jew Hatred, and Beth Tikva Synagogue, as I mentioned. And I want to say that I do read this list with our programs, though some people say it's too long and maybe unnecessary, because I think it is necessary to acknowledge this consortium of Zionist organizations that are collaborating across the continent and a few in Europe. Sometimes we have an Australian organization and others, and even organizations, of course, in Israel. And we are working collaboratively as much as possible to share information and build our Jewish resilience, pride, and our strength in fighting Jew hatred. CAEF is a national charitable organization, and we depend on individual donors to support our work in education, advocacy, building interfaith relations, and taking action to end Jew hatred. We're proud to have built a collaborative with over 60 organizations, and we invite others, and any of you listening are welcome to be in touch if you wish to partner in our programs. We're eager to have more partners also to plan and implement the conference Stronger Together, Fighting to End Jew Hatred, which will take place on September 10th at the Beth Avraham Yosef Toronto Synagogue. If you would like to be involved or make a donation, please go to our website or contact me directly at Andrea, ANDRIA, @CAEF.ca. Most Jews in the diaspora are likely aware that for some months now, almost since the fourth Israeli elections were held, there's been a disruption in Israeli society. While demonstrating can be seen as a commitment to democracy and freedom of speech, it can also be seen as creating divisiveness, confusion, and conflict. The current conflict is greater in substance than a mere disagreement on the nature of the proposed judicial reforms, a conflict that has at times escalated in intensity and left fissures in what might otherwise be Jewish unity. In times of external threats and attacks, Israelis are famous for coming together, standing shoulder to shoulder, bolstering one another, supporting their government and the military, and proudly flying their much-loved flag. But since the introduction of proposed judicial reforms, something previous coalitions and a range of political leaders considered in the past, even current opposition leaders once endorsed, there have been radical calls to halt all proposed IDF reservists not show up to serve, and even calls for civil actions that are not merely civil disobedience. Yotam Eyal, CEO of the Legal Forum for Israel, or HaForum, will provide an overview of the issues, the proposals, and the current climate of discontent as some Israelis and Jews in the diaspora perceive the proposed reforms as a threat to democracy. He will also answer your questions after his presentation. The Legal Forum for Israel is an NGO established in 2004 after the Israeli government forced the evacuation of thousands of Jews from Gush Katif, leaving Gaza for the Arabs, evacuating all Jews from an area that had a Jewish presence since Bible times. The Legal Forum operates to preserve the values of democracy that balance the three governmental authorities, defends human rights, and defends Israel's interests in the national and international arena. Working with about 400 attorneys and other professionals, Yotam has presented dozens of times to Knesset committees and written articles, drafted legislative critiques and advisories, and spoken out in the media on issues that include many legal matters, including judicial reform. He has represented Israel's interests in cases against the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, which is anti-Semitic and even genocidal in its core mission. Yotam has an LLB and an MBA, and I must add, he comes from a family of devoted scientists who have made many contributions to the welfare of Israel and the Jewish people. The audience here tonight in the synagogue and on Zoom is welcome to put questions forward after Yotam speaks. If you're watching online, please put your questions in the Q&A box, not in the chat. After Yotam speaks, Anita Bromberg, president of CAEF, will moderate the question and answer period. Thank you again for coming and welcome, Yotam.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Yotam Eyal. I'm from the Legal Forum for Israel. The Legal Forum for Israel is organizations, as Andrea mentioned, is around 400 volunteers lawyers. That in the last 19 years, it was involved in almost any process that happened in Israel, mostly focused on the judicial system. And we are focusing mostly about defending the interests of the Jewish people in Israel. And the judicial system is our main aim, my main idea from the understanding that in Israel, the judicial system is actually controlling everything that happened in Israel. And no further notice, I will start about the subject that we actually came to speak about the judicial reform. But in order for understanding the judicial reform, we need to start in the beginning. And I will ask you a question. Who cares about the judicial system in this state? I mean, if I go to probably any state in the world, and I will ask the people, who is the president of the Supreme Court? Who is the justices in the Supreme Court? And who you know, how your justice system even work? You know, probably if he's not a lawyer, no one will know how to answer about these questions. And suddenly, in Israel, such a boring topic became the main topic in Israel, a topic that people went out to the streets. In hundreds of people went out to the streets. Some of them supporting the judicial reform, some of them against the judicial reform. But this topic that was supposed to be so boring, but no one even care about in his state, becoming the main topic. So for understanding how this topic becomes such a big topic, we need first of all to go to the beginning, and the beginning starts in the establishment of Israel. 1948, David Ben-Gurion decided to declare about Israel as a Jewish state, as a state. And when he decided to declare Israel as a Jewish state, he sat down with a group of people, and they thought how we want to see the Jewish state, how we want to see Israel. And they have a lot of big arguments because there was different groups, you know, the Jewish people, when they came to Israel, they came from so many different places, and they came from different cultures and from different ideas about religious, about even cultural. And when they came, they have a lot of arguments about these issues. For example, how the Shabbat will look on the Israeli state. Will we have a public transportation? How will be the service in the army? Will everyone will go to the service in the army, even that you have it's against your religious? It does. So all these questions went up, and because we were in a very bad time, let's say we have few armies that came to fight and try to destroy Israel. So they understood if they want Israel to be established, they need first of all to stop these arguments, and first of all to establish the state. The problem was that if you're not establishing these issues, you're going to have problems later. So they understood this issue, and they says, in the first Knesset, in the first parliament, we're not going to decide about these issues, but the second will do it, because they're not going to have war as we are, and they're going to have much more time to handle these things. But what happened when they got into the second Knesset. They said the same thing. We don't want to get into these issues. So Israel doesn't have a constitution. So because we don't have a constitution, we follow in a different way. And then they figure out a certain way to do it. They made a system of basic laws. These basic laws, if you look on constitution, any constitution, and you look on establishment of state, you can see there is 3 different parts of any constitution or the way of the state is working. The first one is about the symbols of the state. For example, what will be the anthem of the state, what will be the flag of the state, what will be the symbols. And so we have laws in Israel that define each one of these categories. And we have the second one is how the system will be built, how will be the mechanism of the state, what will be the establishments of the state. For example, will we have a president? Will we have a prime minister? Will we have a government, a Knesset? And all these things needs to be in a law in order the state to operate. And the third one, and that's the one that we're going to speak mostly about, is about the values of the state. And the values of the state, this is the most controversial one. And because it's the most controversial one, for around 50 years, no one even touched the subjects. They're too scared about touching what will be the values of the state, but no, there was even one basic law that spoke about the values of the state in the first 50 years of Israel. And what will happen when we don't have anything in a law, when we don't have something that is very that you can see and you can determine what happened? We have a vacuum, and when you have a vacuum, always there will be. It's in physics. Always when you have a vacuum, something gonna get into this vacuum. So around 1980, there was a movement in Israel, in the judicial system in Israel. It's called the activist movement. The head of this movement was named Aaron Barak. Probably you heard about his name because he's a very known person in Israel. And in the beginning, he was the government legal advisor. But in Israel, is also the general attorney, and it's a big issue that probably we're going to speak later. So, but he was a government legal advisor. When he was a government legal advisor, he tried to make a law that says about the values of a state. It's called the human dignity law. But this law didn't go through. Later, he went to becoming justice in the Supreme Court. And when he was justice in the Supreme Court, he used this vacuum to make some changes in the Israeli system. For example, the first one is about in which ways the Supreme Court can rule in cases that connecting to the government. What will be the reason that it can rule out decisions of a government? And that was in 1980. Most of you probably heard about the human dignity law, and everyone focusing all the time about the human dignity law. This was the big change in the Israeli system. But I'm speaking more than 10 years before. He took this reason, and he said, I can rule over the decision of a parliament, of a Knesset, by if I say that something is unreasonable. Now, when we're speaking about what is unreasonable, if I ask any one of you, each one will give me a different answer, because my reasonableness is not your reasonableness. And if you can define exactly in which ways you can overrule things, that's making you a problem. So, but let's keep it in the side. Later, 92, there was Israel decide to pass a bill in the Knesset, a basic law named the Human Dignity Law. This human dignity law, it was very controversial. And it took around 5 years, 6 years to pass it in the Knesset. And why? Because they was very scared about what will be the influence of this law. Because in the moment that I said the human dignity law is defined that that every person has a right for human dignity and freedom. What is human dignity? What is human dignity? Will my freedom of, let's say, freedom of speech is more important from the freedom of occupation of someone else? What is human dignity? Where is the line is passed by? And that was actually the MK members that was in the time of the human dignity law, they was very concerned about this issue. And the person that was behind the legislation, the head of the committee says, I promise you that this law will not give the court the option to overrule a decision of the Knesset. So you can be relaxed. You know, it's not gonna change anything. In '95, it's changed everything. Aaron Barak, when he was in the Supreme Court, he was a justice. He wasn't still the Chief Justice. So he ruled in a case he called the Mizrahi case. Mizrahi case is very boring case. You remember that I asked you before about the boringness of the judicial idea, and most of people doesn't care about it. So the Mizrahi was very boring. It was a bank that had that had an argument with some settlements about tax and land, and about things that no one even cares in Israel. So why this case is so important? Because what Aaron Barak did, he wrote around 350 pages of ruling, and around 150 he wrote, because of the human dignity law, I can overrule the another laws of the Knesset. And most of the people didn't even understand what happened. And we saw the inflation just a few years later. But later he used this sentence that he put in the ruling to turn over other decisions of the Knesset. And now I'm gonna stop this point, and I'm gonna jump a few years later. 2004, 2005, Ariel Sharon is the Prime Minister of Israel. Ariel Sharon, the Prime Minister of Israel, is getting elected by the promise of Din Netzarim Kedin Tel Aviv. Din Netzarim Kedin Tel Aviv, that means Netzarim was a very small settlement inside Gaza. And he says, I'm going to defend Netzarim, same as I'm going to defend Tel Aviv. A few months later, he went and published a program, an idea about evacuation of Gush Katif. And when he decided to do it, it was against the voters' decision, against what we appointed him, but let's say it was legal. So he decided to evacuate. And a lot of people in Israel find it very problematic. They found it very hurtful. I was one of them. So what we did, we went into the streets and we every day, every week, against, and what did invest very strong against the mean that around 6,000 people had criminal charges against them. I got arrested. I was 16 years old. I got arrested. I was in custody for 2 days. Why? Because I went and protested against it. I was standing in the side of the road and protest against it. And we suffer from a tremendous violence. And what happened? Like suddenly, the judicial system, where she stands for. I mean, we used to say in Israel, and that was the argument of Aaron Barak, when he decided to go and says, I'm an activist, I can use this human dignity law to make an implementation. We can take this law in order to defend the rights of the people. So what happened? Where the judicial system was. And I can tell you, the judicial system, all the judicial system came together and helped Ariel Sharon. So, for example, the Supreme Court by himself ruled to put in custody for 3 weeks 13 years old girls that we went in protests, because he says they are more dangerous. Their protest is more dangerous then because they are hurting the decision of the government and the program for government to evacuate Gush Katif. So where the human dignity, where the rights of these girls went when they decided to evacuate Gush Katif? The persecution was behind it. The justice, all the judicial system, all the courts went and helped it. And that's what we saw in 2004. 2005, the Gush Katif was evacuated. And after it was very went very without anything actually hurtful. I mean, the people that live in Gush Katif and we understood that we want Israel to be safe, to be complete. So we didn't fight in the soldiers that came to evacuate us. So we went very peacefully. And the government had a very big problem with this. And why they have a big problem? Because for years, they just told the public in Israel that we're going to be very violent. Because if you want to go and tell why you need to go and do such thing for evacuate people, you want the public to be in your opinion. And how you do it, you putting some hate against the people that protest against it. And what happened is that it became very peacefully. And a few months later, there was another evacuation, very small evacuation. It's named a small settlement named Amona. Amona is a settlement in Yehuda and Shomron. And what happened is that Ariel Sharon wasn't at this time in his best. He was in hospital, and Ehud Olmert, he was replaced him. And he decided to go with all the force of the police and with brutality police and show the people that protesting that they can't protest anymore. In the end of Amon evacuation, the result was around 260, even more. I think there, but 260 injured settlers, few policemen that mostly got injured by themselves. And one of them is actually the most severe one. He took his bat and broke a window, and it got into his eye. And that was the most severe one from the policeman. In the settlers, we had around 260 people that was in hospitals. And one of them, the most severe one, was actually clinically dead. 15 years old, clinically dead for a few seconds. And Baruch Hashem, today is okay. That was my younger brother. And so we pass all these things. And when we look on these things, we search for what is the thing that actually made all this happen. How all the judicial system that's supposed to protect us wasn't there. And when we look on the things on the things that happened, we saw that there is a big problem in the judicial system. And I'm speaking with you about 20 years ago, but no one even thought about problems in the judicial system in Israel. And we saw that there is a big problem. And what the problems in the judicial system? First of all, I mentioned that we don't have a constitution and what Aaron Barak did. But who is the judges? When we look on the judges, on these judges that have a lot of power, who is these judges? So we look on the judges and we see that how you appoint judges in Israel. And that's a very interesting thing, because most of the Western states, and I'm saying most times, I'm saying like all of them, are actually appointing Supreme Court judges or constitutional judges, because in some places we have a constitutional court separate from the Supreme Court, but all of the places choosing by representative of the public, they choosing the representative, the justices. And what's happened in Israel? In Israel, we have a committee. The committee is 9 members that appointing judges. The committee is combined from 4 different groups: 2 MK members, and 2 parliament members, that means 2 ministers, and 2 lawyer bar associations, and 3 justices from the Supreme Court. In order to appoint Supreme Court judge, you have to have 7 from 9. That means the only group that have a veto right in Israel about appointing Supreme Court judges is the judges themselves. And when we look and see this thing, that who is the judges, we saw that there is a very close group of people that doesn't represent the public. It's the people that appointing themselves in order to this place. And this and it was something amazing because nobody even understood it before. But these people is actually have a lot of power right now because they got the power in in the activist movement. They got a lot of power. And they're choosing themselves. So we're giving a very small minority the option to overrule the decision of the Knesset and the government. And that's something amazing. So if we speak about the judicial reform, and that's an issue that I want to speak about. Sorry, so if we speak about judicial reform, the main issue in the judicial reform is who will appoint the judges in the Supreme Court. This is the most controversial subject that we have on the judicial reform. But let's say, okay, so let's say we have who is appointing the Supreme Court judges. But what is the effect of the Supreme Court? What is the effect of the Supreme Court? So I told you about very sad story about what happened in 2004. 2004 was 20 years ago. Who cares about 2004? So I speaking like a long time ago. But what actually the influence of the Supreme Court? So I'm gonna touch few cases from in the last years that actually we can see the effect of the Supreme Court on how Israel state is look like, what is the values of the state. The first one is about the infiltrators to Israel. In Israel we had a big problem of infiltrators. Maybe we still have. They went into Israel, but we still have people in Israel because in like 15 years ago there was a big understanding in Africa that Israel is a very good state to live by. And if it's a good state to live by, it's a good for us to make some money and send back to the families in Africa. You know, some people in Sudan, some people in Eritrea doesn't have a lot of money. It's very hard living there. So they decide to go through Egypt because Israel doesn't have a border with these states. They decide to go through Egypt and go to Israel through the border illegally and get into Israel and work in order to bring money to their families. And I'm going to say there is few of them, but was the refugees. But most of them is not refugees. Most of them is people that came to search for a good job. And Israel understood we have a problem because it became thousands of infiltrators that got into Israel. And Israel, first of all, it's economically. If you have a lot of infiltrators that come to Israel, that means we need to give them social benefits. We have people that doesn't have any social insurance that we need to deal with. Second, what about the Jewish state? The Jewish state. We want Israel to be a Jewish state or not to be a Jewish state. These people are not Jews. They're coming into Israel, and now it's infiltrators that doesn't have any connection to the Jewish people. The third one is about crime. These people, because they don't have a lot of money, because they're living in the places and they're raising the crime in these places. And that's for a fact. You can see today in South Tel Aviv, one of the biggest cities in Israel. So in South Tel Aviv, we had a very nice neighborhood, but today is a crime neighborhood because all the infiltrators came and sitting in these places. So this is issues. And you know what? It's issues that maybe not so bad, maybe very severe. That's our decision. But Israel state decides that it's a very big problem. And in order to deal with these issues, they passed a bill in the Knesset that says every infiltrator that come into Israel, we're going to put him in a custody for a year. And after a year, we can release him because we think this is the best way to make them go back to their state. And the Supreme Court ruled against it. And you know what? Maybe it's a good ruling. Maybe it's not, it's against the human dignity to put someone in a custody. So it's coming back to the Knesset because they ruled over. It's coming back to the Knesset. And what the Knesset does, they said, okay, you said this is too much time. We're going to do 3 months. 3 months in a custody. And the Supreme Court said, okay, we're going to rule against it again because it's still against our human dignity. So the Knesset says, okay, we understand, but you don't want to put people in a custody. So let's find another solution. we're going to send them to a third country, a country that is very peaceful, that we can send them to there and they can live their life. And you know what the court says? It says you're not allowed to. It's against their human dignity. So the Knesset did this, another thing that says, okay, you don't want us to send them out of Israel, so we want to make them want to live out Israel. And how are we going to make it? We're going to make a law that every person that work from the infiltrators need to bring, we're going to take 25% from his salary, put it in a place that in the moment that he's going to left Israel, you're going to get all the money back. That means he doesn't lose any money, but his money going to be in the custody of the state for a while. And you know what the Supreme Court says? Again, it's against the human dignity, so we overruled it. And when we look about the Jewish state, and I mentioned before about the Jewish state, so this ruling have a big influence about will Israel be a Jewish state? Because if we're going to give any person the option to get into Israel just because he wants to come to Israel, maybe we're not going to have a majority of Jewish people in Israel. Let's go take another two examples. We have the regulation law. The regulation law passed in the Knesset in 2016. In 2000, the regulations law says that we have a settlements in Yudan and Shomron, but the government was behind. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you. So the regulation law is a bill that passed in the Knesset. That the idea behind it is we have this law out of Yudan and Shomron. We have this law in Israel, in the other side of Israel. And this law says that if the government are involved in building something, and later we find out that there is a person that owns this land. So what will the government need to do? They giving him a compensation of the money that he lost, and they're gonna and the building that they build will stay there. And the Israel and the Knesset says we want to do the same thing in Yehuda and Shomron, and we have around 50 settlements that are in a place that the government was behind the settlements. The government helped them to be built, and today they are illegal. So this is a good way to take a law that already exists in Israel and to apply it on Yehuda and Shomron. And it passed in the Knesset, and it came to the Supreme Court. And when it came to the Supreme Court says overruled it, and it says it's illegal. You can't do this law. Why you can't do this law? Because it's against the human rights and the human dignity of the Palestinians in Yehuda and Shomron. But we didn't spoke even about a settlement that we know that we have people that of a private property. We spoke about settlements, but maybe someone will come one day and says, this is my property. And in this, and still they says this is against the human rights, because if there exist Palestinians like this, and he's gonna come, he will stay in a place, but it's not, but it will be his human rights will be hurt. So they overruled it. Another one is going by the Jewish nation state law. The Jewish nation state law made a big headlines a few years ago. If the Israel, we spoke about the values, what will be the values of a state. So in 92, passed one that decide what will be a value of a state. That's the human dignity law. In 94, there was another one. It was the rights of occupation. And till then, till 2017, not even one was defined what will be the values of a state. So the next one was the Jewish nation state law. The idea behind the Jewish nation state law was to determine Israel as a Jewish state, because we had a big all the things that I actually already mentioned. We have a big problem about will Israel be a Jewish state or not Jewish state? Because the Supreme Court a lot of time argue that you're not needed to be a Jewish state. What is the value, the Jewish value of the state? It's a big question. So he said, for example, in the infiltrators, he says I don't care about the Jewish state. I care about their human rights. So the Jewish nation state law became to determine how Israel is a Jewish state. And mostly determine things like what will be the holidays, for example, Yom Ha'atzmaut, and it determine what will be symbols again. We determine things like this, but it determine also another things. It says, we believe that the Jewish people have a right to live in every place in Israel. And the Supreme Court came and says, we're not going to overrule this law, but we're going to say that we want to say that this law can't be applicable on different laws. That means I'm not going to disqualify this law, but I can say that it's only declaration law. This law can have influence on the other things that are happening in Israel. And that's actually overruled the law, because it wasn't the idea of the Knesset when they decide to pass this bill. So this is how the judicial system is affecting. And when we see how the judicial system is actually affecting about the Jewish state, and about how the state will look like, now we need to be careful who is the judges. And when we look about who is the judges, that means we want the judges to be more like us. I want, if I giving you a lot of power, there is a very known sentence from a very known movie that says, with a big responsibility coming a big power. If you want, it's in Spider-Man, and the uncle of Spider-Man is coming and tell him, when you get a lot of power, you need to have a lot of responsibility. You need to be caring about what you are doing. And when he came, and the judges in Israel doesn't have any responsibility for the ruling. When MK member did something that we don't like, what will be in the next election? Is not going to be appointed again. He knows that he needs to do things that the people that appoint him want. When we're going to the judges, if the judges, for example, release a murderer from jail, and this guy going and murders someone, he's not going to pay about it. He doesn't care. He did his ruling. So what happened is that we're giving a lot of power to very minority group that doesn't have any responsibility for the actions. And that's something that got upset a lot of people in Israel. And when I spoke about 20 years ago, when we start speaking about the judicial system, no one even thought about the things that I'm telling you now. People said, actually, when my dad that established the organization, he went into Canada like 15 years ago. He came here, and he spoke with a lot with people, lawyers, and they told him, are you crazy? You think that you can change the judicial system? You think that the judicial system is interesting someone in Israel? And you know what? Today everyone is getting interested. It actually was the main topic on the election, because people got into this understanding that if we want to that our vote in the Knesset will be matter. If we want to be as a citizen that we have the right to influence on his state, we have to have a strong judicial system that actually listen to the public, but a judicial system that getting the same values. So the judicial reform mostly focused about the appointing judges. And I mentioned the unreasonability, and I'm going to speak about the other two topics. I want to say first, and I'm gonna make a pause. I want to say first, the judicial reform not going to pass. Probably. Today, in the place that we are studying right now, the judicial reform, as it look like, not going to pass in the same way. We don't know yet what is going to pass and not going to pass, but we know that it's definitely not going to be in the same way that it was presented to the public. So, but still, I want to touch in another issue that we have in the judicial reform, because this issue is very interesting, and I think most of the people can understand the problematic situation, and that's about the government legal advisor. The government legal advisor in Israel is very unique. Richard Posner is very known law professor in the United States. He was a justice also, And he spoke about this role. And he says, I think this is the most powerful job in all the world, the government legal advisor in Israel. And what is the government legal advisor? So I mentioned before, but the government legal advisor is also the general attorney. That means that the person that consulting the government in the morning prosecute them in the night. For example, let's take Netanyahu, because Bibi Netanyahu is a very easy case to see. Netanyahu wants to get legal advice. So he's going to the government legal advisor and he asks him for it. Later, he's going to the court because they're prosecuting. So how you can do both roles? That's something crazy. But the government legal advisor have even more power, because in Israel, advisor, and it's something that we are find out suddenly, is not advisor. Advisor is a guy that can say to you, you can do one thing or you can do other thing. For example, if the government made a decision that the government legal advisor doesn't like, he can tell to the government, you're not allowed to represent yourself in front of the court. I will represent you and I will represent the other side. When someone appeals against a government decision in Israel, so it's getting to the Supreme Court, there is two people in the Supreme Court before the Supreme Court, the government legal advisor and the guy that appealing. The guy that appeal against it, speaking against the decision. The government legal advisor also speak against the decision. What happened is the government doesn't have even the right to represent themselves in front of the court. It's something that every person is the first thing that every person have, the right to represent himself in front of the court, and the government of Israel doesn't have it. And that's something crazy. And I think every common logic can understand this is a problematic. So this is another issue that we are speaking right now in Israel. So this is the judicial reform. Now, I think I explained, and I'm gonna get your question because if I didn't explain right all of the issues, but I think I explained about why we need the judicial reform, but I want not to touch only why we need the judicial reform. I want to speak also about the other side, because we see right now in Israel, I represent my side, the side of 64 mandates that's supporting the judicial reform. What about all the other side that's scared about the judicial reform? Why they so scared? Because they said one thing. They said the Israel not will be balanced. There will no even one institute in Israel that can stop the government and the Knesset from doing bad things. And you know what? It's very scary. For real. It's very scary to have a body of people that just can do whatever you want and no one can stop it. And this is why these people are so scared of. And I will say another thing. It's not only the balance. Our government and our Knesset in the last month wasn't so smart act. They didn't do such a smart moves. For example, they scared the people in Israel. They put petitions in the Knesset. They put bills that's scary, very scary. For example, what you do if you're gonna go to the Kotel and without wearing wearing like clothes that very tznuim. So what we'll do, and they says you're gonna get into jail, you're gonna pay a fine, and that's in very scary people, but not religious in Israel. They says we don't want these people to get so much power. And if you combine these two things, you combine the idea that you don't have a balance, and you combine the idea of a people that you are scared of, because if this is a religious people that maybe wants to make a religious state, that's very scary. So I'm going to argue that we have balanced things in Israel. We have a balanced system. And I'm going to argue more that even that it's scary, I'm still doesn't want today, the situation is exactly the same. Today, there is a minority of a group in the judicial system that doesn't get elected by the public, but doing the same thing. But I'm going to say it's balanced. And you know how we can say it's a balance? Let's see, just yesterday, we have a vote in the Knesset for the representative in the Knesset in the committee of appointing judges. I mentioned before that in the Knesset, we have two representatives in the committee of appointing judges. And the coalition, that is 64 mandates, and supposed to pass whoever they want to appoint two people from the coalition to be the representative. And you know what happened? When they did the vote, they found out that some people in the coalition, no one knows who is it, because it wasn't the vote anonymously. So people from the coalition vote for the member of the opposition. So you say that we don't have a balance in Israel. You say that in the moment that we're going to have going to give power to the government, they are controlling the Knesset. Because they're controlling the Knesset, we don't have anything to balance. But we just saw a balance. We saw a balanced system. I mean, if you look on the MK members, these MK members didn't follow the government. So we have a separation between these two bodies. And we have another two things that making balance in the system. First of all is our way of elections. In Israel, in average, we have election every 2 years. Every 2 years. And any election, there is a different government after it. Actually, if you look on the last 40 years, you can't find even one government that was the same, one coalition that was the same as the coalition before. Second, some of them is leftist and rightist, some of them mostly leftist, some of them, and today we have only rightist. But this is the first time that we have something like this. So there is a different coalition, different things. So let's say that we're giving the Knesset the option to put the representative. Let's say we're giving the Knesset and the government the option to elect the Supreme Court judges. So in every 2 years, there will be a different government, a different coalition that will choose the different judges with the different values. So that's another mechanism that we have that actually balance these issues. The other one is about how it's easy to take the government it's about what the coalition is made of. The coalition is in Israel made of have to have from few different parties, because in order to have a coalition, you have to have 60 MK members. And the biggest that we have ever in years was 40 mandates. So that means if you want to make a coalition, you have to be with other parties. And that's giving other parties the option to put another values of the Supreme Court judges. I think this is a very balanced system that in appointing judges. And I think this is giving us an option to make a balanced system. There is another lots of other issues that I can go to, but I'm going to stop now. I think I spoke a lot. And I'm going to give an option to ask question because for you to get to the point that you want. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. We have people in the room and we also have people online. So I'm going to try to balance the questions. If you do have questions in the room so that people online can hear you, there is a mic and Andrea will help you get to them. You know what, before we do that, I want people to get to know you a little bit. So I was reading a little bit about where you live. You told me a little bit about it. My question is, tell us a little bit about where you're living and how is that informing your advocacy around judicial reform?
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. So first of all, I'm living in a small settlement in Yehuda and Shomron named Givat Ariel. Givat Ariel is one of the illegal settlements, it's called, because it's 25 years old, was established by Ariel Sharon and Ehud Barak when he was the minister of defense. And this settlement was established in 1999. And we are living in a small settlement. We don't have regular water, we don't have regular electricity, we're getting it from different sources, but eventually it's not like you're living in a city and you get anything that regularly, because it's a legal settlement. And 2 months ago, we got recognition by the government, so we are actually in the process now of becoming legal. But for a fact, like I'm living in a settlement that I can get a mortgage for my home, for example, because it's illegal. And this settlement in Yehuda and Shomron is very important. The place that I live in, why Ariel Sharon made these settlements. So in year 2000, there was a very sincere, he was very scared about what will be the Palestinian Yehuda and Shomron will build their territory and made a straight going to connect all the cities in the Palestinian cities in Yehuda and Shomron, and the Jewish settlement will be separate. That means that, for example, let's take Ofra, one of the first settlements in Yehuda and Shomron. So he will stay he will stay surrounded by Arab villages. And he says, in order to stop it, I'm going to make a program that I'm going to build settlements in very important places that will separate between them and make the connection between the Israeli settlements. So this is why we establish our settlements. It's a very nice settlement, actually. If you coming to Israel, you're more than welcome to come to visit. I will give you my cell phone number and my email. We have a winery, and we are just above Shiloh Stream. Shiloh Stream, if you know or don't know, it's a place that the Maccabim was fighting. One of the Maccabim, two of the fights of the Maccabim was in the stream. So we actually be above where our history happened. We have Shiloh, the Mishkan, where the place that Israel that when they got into Israel, they took the Mishkan, it was like the small temple, and put it in Shiloh. So it's just across my house, and vineyards all over. And you can actually see that we have Jewish people that living there by all the vineyards and the olive trees and all the things that we are growing. And my settlements actually is one of the settlements that suffered from the decisions of a regulation law of a Supreme Court, because we were supposed to be legal a few years ago when the government decided to legalize it. And when the Supreme Court decided against it, overruled against it, it influenced on the life, not only me. I actually wasn't living in this settlement at this time, but it wasn't only on me, it was on the life of thousands of people that living in these areas, because these people still can get good water, we're getting good electricity. I mean, when I need to make a Zoom call, so I'm going to our settlement because I know that my line wasn't be good enough. So, I mean, the internet wasn't so good. So that's things that happen. It's still just because the Supreme Court overruled it. And this is thing that we're actually feeling every day. And when I'm speaking about the influence of the Supreme Court, so for me as someone that living it in a daily, I can see it in my own eyes. I can feel it. I can feel it in my pocket. I can feel it in the way that I'm living. I can feel it when I see the Arab villages just next to us, building houses by houses by houses and getting spread all over. And where we want to build a house, we can't. The Supreme Court will decide to demolish our house. And why? Because there is a different rules in Yehuda and Shomron. You know, the Yehuda and Shomron is actually, it's funny, but it's very interesting. But we have a rule in Yehuda and Shomron. The Palestinian Authority have a rule that you're not allowed to sell lands to Jews. And if you sell land to a Jew, they're gonna kill you. And that's actually a rule in the Palestinian Authority. And that's a law in Palestinian Authority. So let's say the Palestinian Authority are terrorists, and the Palestinian Authority wants to, they cares about these things. But the Israeli court, the Israeli Supreme Court, he still says that Jewish people can't buy land in Yehuda and Shomron. And if we want to buy land in Yehuda and Shomron, what we need to do is to establish a company in Jordan. And this company is buying lands in Yehuda and Shomron. So this company is a Jordan company, and this is why she can buy lands, because Jewish people can buy straight lands. And that's something that the Supreme Court in Israel approved. It's the only, we said Israel apartheid. Israel is definitely not apartheid. If someone have rules against him, it's the Jewish people that can buy these things. And that's the thing that we are actually living every day. And we see the spreading of the Arabs, and we see all the stuff. And when I drive to work, I can get hit by rocks. I can hit by people shooting at me. And this is the daily situations. And just because we don't actually apply the Israeli law on Yehuda and Shomron and the sovereignty of Israel, of a Jewish place, and the army still try to fight these things.
Follow-up question then. Will the judicial reform package change your life for the better? Are you hopeful that it will? What's in it that's going to change the situation? Maybe you could briefly explain that.
Okay, so it's a good point, because it's that say that I didn't actually said this point, and that point is very important. Why the judicial reform is so important? Why all the judicial system is so important? Because every time that we look on the main issues on Israel, we see that every issue that we try to change in Israel eventually got into the judicial system and stuck. And that's the main thing, because when I say if you're going to apply on my personal life, it's not only on my personal life. It's going to be on every Jew personal life, not only in Israel. Because when every law that we are trying to do in Israel, every change that we are trying to do in Israel, eventually stuck in the judicial system. So if I want Israel to be a Jewish state, for example, and I think a Jewish state, let's speak about the law that giving every Jewish the option to become and being Israeli citizen. It's a law. You know, this law is not equal, because there is citizen in Israel doesn't get the same rights. The Arab people in Israel doesn't have the right to bring their family into Israel and having the option to become a citizen. And you know why this law is not equal? Because Israel is not a regular state. Israel is the state of the Jewish people. We came to Israel after the Holocaust. We came to Israel because we need a place to have a home. We came to the land of our ancestors. When I'm speaking about where I live, I see the ancestors, what our ancestors does. So we're coming into the place of our ancestors, where we lived for 2,000 and 3,000 years. And we're coming back to this place, and we needed home for the Jewish people. And when you look, you see anti-Semitism in every place in the world. And a lot of people make aliyah because anti-Semitism. And we need a state but not going to be anti-Semitic. We need a state that people can feel safe. So Israel is not an equal state. It's equal in the rights of every person in Israel. That means I have the same equal rights as Arab person in Israel about freedom of speech, about how I can buy a house, about every citizen rights. But it doesn't mean we need to have the same nation rights. And this nation rights is very important for the Jewish people, to people in Canada, people in the United States, and in Europe. It's very important to them also to have a place that they get connected to, that they can feel safe. And this is why, when you ask me if it's going to influence on my life, yeah, it definitely can influence on my life, because I don't want the judicial system to stop every time and to make us I want the judicial system in Israel to make us the option to make a Jewish state. And I think this is in today, it can't be. Today, it's very problematic. Today, if you look on the verdict of the judges in so many cases, you can see that it's not going by this way. So in order us to feel that we have an influence on the state, and I think every person wants to know that he have influence on his state. That's the main thing that we need to do.
Thank you. So there's one question from the audience, and then perhaps Andrea can encourage some of our audience here in the synagogue just to come to the mic. But Naftali Bennett was a guest last night here in Toronto. And I'm going to quote something that it was reported. He said, there's a bumpy road ahead, but democracy has and will prevail. He maintained that tribalism and division amongst Israeli Jews represent the biggest threat to Israel's future, even more than a nuclear-armed Iran. So do you agree with him?
I think that Israel is very strong, first of all. And the Jewish people in Israel and the Israeli citizens are very strong. We passed through very hard times. You know, Israel never was a quiet state. Since 1948, we fight for our security. Since in 1977, we have changed that the Likud won the election, and everything was changed, and there was a big, Menachem Begin, that eventually we know how he died. So he had a lot of demonstrations against him, and they called him a traitor, and that things happened years ago. And if we're going to go back, keep going, what about Oslo Accords? The Oslo Accords was so conflicted in Israel, and people actually suffer in their life. So many people died because of this Oslo Accord. So you can argue that it was good. I don't care if it's good or it's bad. It's definitely conflicted and made people very, very, very angry in Israel. And the murder of Rabin also. And what about Gush Katif, that I just mentioned, the evacuation of Gaza Strip? All this happened in only 75 years. And still, the Israeli people in Israel, living in Israel and wants to live in Israel, and still fighting for the state. So I think that the Jewish people that for 2,000 of years that was in the Gola, that was in the Sapir, they kept themselves Jewish people, and they still always thought about going back to Israel. And I think if we are so strong nation that even if we have things that we are fighting in Israel, that we are conflicted, that it's getting a big argument, we still gonna get solved eventually. And it's okay that we have arguments, and I'm still gonna advocate for the things that I believe in. And because I think this way we're gonna eventually will make Israel much more democracy. So I'm gonna advocate and I'm gonna fight for it. But I think the things that now going raise up because of the judicial reform and the protests, it's a good thing because it's taking the conflicts out. And if it were under the table, now it's out, and we can actually speak about the conflict. And the first move, the first thing, if you want to heal someone, it's to touch the wounds. You need to first of all, it's going to be hurt. You need to touch the things that hurt in order to fix them. So I think we are in a process that eventually will be good. And I know that people in Israel feeling very hard now, feeling very, very strongly. Even me sometimes, even my friends, speaking about people calling not serving in the army. It's something that we never had in Israel. And this thing is very hard. But eventually, the majority in Israel wants to live together. The majority in Israel wants Israel state. So we're going to get into this point, and hopefully we're going to have change. Going to change the system, and we need to be open to the option to settle on certain things, and that's okay. I know anytime that I'm a lawyer, so anytime that I'm coming into the court, I know that maybe I'm not going to get 100% of what I want. In Israel, probably I don't know if I'm going to get 1% of what I want, but I know that I need sometimes to settle. And that's okay. We can settle on certain things, and we can go into negotiate and start and try to find the common ground. But Israel will still gonna exist. Israel is still gonna do, and eventually, people. I think 80% of the population right now in Israel understand we have a problem in the judicial system. Not everyone agree on the same solution. Yeah, sorry. Not everyone agree on the same solution, but we understand that we have a problem. Eventually, we're going to get into the solution, even if it's going to take us some time. We are young state.
We have a question.
About postponing the judicial reform. Okay. Yeah, and the implications. Thank you. Thank you for your question. So what Netanyahu did is actually, he postponed the judicial reform. We don't know what exactly the reasons that made him to postpone the judicial reform. People says it's about the army, people in the army that went against him and says we're not going to serve and it's going to hurt the security of Israel state. Other people say it's about economically. He says that he's promised to some organizations in the world that he's not gonna keep going with the judicial reform because the economic was dropped down. So no one actually knows, but we can see what happened. And what happened is that the judicial reform is actually not gonna pass right now as it was. And Netanyahu is a very interesting person, and I call Netanyahu Mr. Status Quo. Netanyahu doesn't like big changes. And if you look on the years of Netanyahu, you can see that he never did a big change. He always tried, he have a perception that says if Israel will stay in the same way and we don't gonna have war, we're not gonna have a big argument, that means the economic will grow up and Israel will gonna get better. So in this perception, he doesn't like to go into a big arguments. So I think that he doesn't really want the judicial reform, but I know that he doesn't have a lot of option because the people that vote for him is people that want the judicial reform. So it kept him in a place that he needs to decide what to do with it. He can't go against it, but he still doesn't want to pass it. So it got into a place that he postponed it. And now he says that if the negotiation in the president house not gonna be not make any success, so they're gonna do the judicial reform one-sided. I don't think it's gonna happen. I think maybe it's gonna take one part of a judicial reform. Maybe he's gonna touch few points because, as I said, he doesn't like a big changes. So I think he's gonna take only the part that's gonna give him the option to say, I did a change. That's my opinion. But what happened in Israel now is that the judicial reform doesn't pass through. And if Israel is today staying in the same situation that you are, in the same place, and no one knows what's happening right now in the judicial reform, everyone tries to understand if there will be or not will be a judicial reform. And we need to see in the last, let's say in the next month, it's actually what will be in the end. Thank you. First of all, we don't have a deep state in Israel. We have not so deep state in Israel as we've seen in the last months. That means the deep state is not a deep, is not underground. I mean, today is actually raised up, and you can see how whole the inflation position holding by people with the same certain of mind. That means, so I don't know if, and I don't think that most of them sitting together and thinking about how we're gonna control the state, but they're already in certain of mind that they are controlling the state. And because in this way, they actually use this power. So for example, as mentioned, the judicial system, the judicial system in Israel is not, it didn't came by an accident that they have this influence. And it's a thing that I didn't thought that I'm going to speak about, but I'm going to mention the issue. You all know the New Israel Fund. The New Israel Fund in 1982, just 5 years after the Likud won the election, they established a new program in Israel. It's called the Judicial Program of the New Israel Fund. And what they did in this program, they went into very promising people, very promising lawyers that was in the offices of the government in Israel and in the prosecution.
You mean prominent or promising?
Very promising people that they're gonna get into a high role. So very promising people. And when they came, they went into these people and told them, we're gonna pay for you for master degree in American or UK university. And we're going to pay not only the degree, we're going to pay you a salary, we're going to pay you all the amount of expansion that you need to take in order to study. And you need to just to do one thing. After you finish this master degree, you need to go and volunteer in one of our organizations for a year or two. And in this way, that means 82 years before we actually understand the New Israel Fund even exists. And for years, they put people in the system. And it's not under the surface. If you're going to go to the website of the New Israel Fund and search for the program, you will see who is the person that was in the program. And some of them is in the Supreme Court today. Others was the government legal advisor. So there is groups that actually work for years to influence the state for certain places. And we didn't understand it for years. And we understand it only in around 2004, 2005. So that thing did actually influence on the state for years. And I think today things getting changed, because today, let's take the media. You spoke about the media. You say the media is obvious. So when you look at the media in Israel, if you look 10 years ago, 15 years ago, you know what? Let's go 20 years ago. There was an MK member 15 years ago that name was Uri Orbach. He was a minister later. And before he was a minister, before he was a MK member, he was in the media. And he was in Galei Tzahal. Galei Tzahal is the house where it's the school for the media in Israel. 90% of the people that controlling today the places in the media in Israel was in the service in the army. There was in Galei Tzahal. That means when I served in a combat unit in the army, and when I saved and risked my life, they risked their life by the microphone. And these people, it's okay. Some of them is actually that can't be a combat soldiers, but these places was very it's like Ivy League. Only the Ivy League people can get into this place. And they later got into the media in Israel. When they got into the media in Israel, they have the same agenda because they learn the same agenda. And Uri Orbach said he was the only one in Galei Tzahal that was right. And he says, I want everyone to go to the media. He called everyone, I want you to go to the media, start going to the media. 20 years later, and today, the media in Israel still not balanced, but much more balanced than it was when it was 20 years ago. If I look today, I can see that we have different channels that speaking in different voices. We have newspapers that they're speaking in different voices. Not everyone in the same certain of mind. And so we have a difference. So I think today it's around 40 or 60% in Israel. And it's a big change. How it got changed? Because we understood that there is a problem and we worked to fix it. And I think today, again, with the judicial system, everyone understands there is a problem, we work to fix it. In the army, when we understand there is a problem, lots of good people get into the army in a high role and try to fix it. This is how we do things. In the moment that you understand you have a problem, you work to fix it. So there is a problem, but I think this problem today in a place that we can actually start fixing it in Israel. And yeah, I want to say, just before a question, a few words about the things that we did in my organization. Because I mentioned before that we established in Gush Katif. We started before Gush Katif in 2004. So when we understood that there is a problem in the system, we thought what we can do. I wasn't in this organization yet. As I mentioned, in Gush Katif, I was in high school. But my dad, when he established the organization, how we can change the system. So one thing what we did, we established a regulatory body on the prosecution in Israel. In 2012, we made a law proposal that says that we need to establishment of body for regulatory of the prosecution. And what happened is that the prosecution in Israel, you mentioned just now the deep state of the idea of the prosecution, they went into strikes against it, and they fought very strong. It took around 8 years to establish this body. And the head of this body was actually retired, resigned from the role because they went against her. And the prosecution make her life miserable. So what we saw there is a problem in the prosecution. And we said, how you can fix it? First of all, let's put it in a clear area. Let's make everyone see what happened in the prosecution. So we're gonna make a regulatory body. The idea of the legal forum is about seeing problems and try to see how is the best solution and work to do it. Sometimes it's going to take 8 and 10 years, but eventually it's going to happen. So when I'm speaking about changing the system, when I'm speaking about these things, we look on these issues, we start working on it. It's going to take a few years, but eventually things are going to change. So this is it was a good time for me to speak about this issue, but I'm going to get anyways.
So I'm gonna voice a couple questions quickly from the audience again. Is the solution to create a constitution? And is that a dream? But you know what Ben Gurion said about dreams.
No, it's such a good question because you're actually touching all the main points about the arguments on these subjects. I don't know if we can make a constitution in Israel. And I will say this straight. I don't know if we're going to have a constitution. The reason that we're not going to have a constitution is because we have such a big difference in Israel and about how Israel needs to look like, what will be the values of a state. And and maybe we don't need a constitution. But if we don't need a constitution, we need other solutions. And that's okay. Maybe, today there is people are speaking about, we call it thin constitution. That means let's make a very thin constitution that determine only very certain things, very small amount of things, and not going all the values of a state. And maybe it can be done, but I definitely not today. And I think we have so many things to do before we're going to have a constitution. Because if you look on just now what we're speaking about for the judicial system and what's happening in Israel, just imagine what will be in the moment that we want to make a constitution. I mean, constitution is to establish the idea of the state for years. And I think if you speak only about one issue and all this happening right now in Israel, so we don't want to jump too high and lose everything.
Okay, so my question, I don't understand.
No.
The question was, if the government, the next government can change the judicial reform or can change anything that this government does, because we don't have a constitution, so why we fight for all these changes? It doesn't make sense. So thank you. I'm going to answer this question. So first of all, I think it's actually a good balance. It's a good balance mechanism, because when let's say we're changing the way of appointing judges. So first of all, not every government changing the way of appointing judges, because in order to change the way of appointing judges, you need to have a lot of people that agree, a big agreement about it. It's a big issue. So for example, some laws you can pass by 2-for-1 in the Knesset. The human dignity law was passed 32 MK members against 21. Where was all the other 60 and something MK members? Wasn't even in the Knesset. So some of the laws in Israel, you can pass just by regular majority. And if you pass this law, it wasn't be by regular majority. We'll need to have it was absolute majority. You need to have at least 60 MK members. So this is make it a little tougher. but it's a good balance mechanism because let's say that we are changing the system, and I'm saying I'm changing the system because the people want it, because the people want me to appoint the Supreme Court judges. And later, the people will choose someone else because he says, I don't want this mechanism. So that actually says that that you don't need to be scared about the implementations of this judicial reform, because if you're gonna be elected, you can change it. So it's not so bad, the idea behind it. But if you look on the history, you will see that mostly in the moment that you actually made this law, it's very hard to change it. Let's see the human dignity law, for example. The human dignity is you can see that it's very controversial. Since 92, it didn't get changed. Even that it was very controversial, and even that people so angry about it. So I think that a lot of government doesn't want to change. A lot of Knesset doesn't want to change the domestic, the main laws in Israel. But if they have an option, it's a good balance mechanism.
So time is running quickly, and I can see people online are thanking us for this session, but have to go. So maybe one more question from the audience, and we'll thank you for attending. So there was one common question around taking us a little away from judicial reform. It had to do with the Lebanese gas deal.
Okay.
And maybe I'm taking you a little bit away from the topic, but since there were so many questions around it, how does that reflect on the health of the system where such a deal could be passed that seemed to be against the interest of the state and didn't really have a consensus behind it, and yet the deal stands? How does that fit into the topic today?
So that's actually get connected to the last question, because there is a sentence in Hebrew that rock that you throw to a be'er, how we say be'er?
Spring well.
Yeah, to the well. It doesn't matter. One person throw a rock to a well, 100 people can get it out, because you can't find this rock. So a lot of things that happening, it's very hard to change. People always says why you don't change the Oslo Accords, for example. You say the Oslo Accords, it's a bad thing. Why you don't change? Because the moment that you're doing something with agreements with other states, you're doing a treaty, you're doing something with other states, it's very hard to change it later. So the idea of the gas with Lebanon, or the gas agreement with Lebanon, it was a very good example for how the Supreme Court is actually hypocrite. And I would say is hypocrite. Why? Because when they got into the gas agreement, so there was appeal against the gas agreement. The appeal says that, first of all, they're doing this agreement in time that there is no government. There is a government, but we already in the way to the election, and they didn't they didn't even brought it before the Knesset to confirm this agreement. And that's things. It's not democracy, because you got into the role of a prime minister. Yair Lapid became the prime minister, but he didn't get elected. Right now, we already, the government decide to go to election. The Knesset decide to go to election. So that means you don't have the mandate to do this stuff. And why I'm saying it's hypocrisy, because in different cases, the Supreme Court ruled exactly the opposite. For example, it says you're not allowed to do things in time when you go into election. For example, when Amir Ohana, he was Minister of Justice for a few months. So, and in the time that there was no head of a prosecution. And he wanted to appoint someone temporarily to become the head of a prosecution. And they appealed against him to the Supreme Court. And you know what the Supreme Court says? You're already going to election. You're not allowed to appoint anyone to this role. The same thing was about appointing Supreme Court judges. In 2006, I think, 2006, there was a Minister of Justice named Daniel Friedman. Daniel Friedman he was leftist actually, but he was very anti-activist. He was very conservative in his mind, and he had a very big argument with a committee with the judges, because he wants certain people to be appointed to the Supreme Court, and they didn't want to. So what he did, so he wanted to appoint people in the time of the election, before the election, to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled. And I'm saying the Supreme Court, it's interesting because the same people that sitting in the committee against him, the same people that have a conflict of interest, ruled against him and said, you're not allowed, it's election time. So suddenly the election time doesn't have any meaning. Suddenly you can do whatever you want, even to obligate the Israel state for years now about agreements that the Knesset didn't approve, because this is what it's going in the same values of the Supreme Court justice. So this is why I say it's very made them an hypocrisy, but in order to change it, it's very hard, because now after you told United States you have obligations to United States, you have obligations to Lebanon to go back on time, let's say the full throw of a stone, and we are the smart what we can do.
Well, Israel has to go all electric and then it won't be relevant, right? Okay, very last question. And I just want to I believe we have the rabbi just joined us. So thank you for joining us.
Now, question with clarification. Could you please clarify, you used the word occupation in the basic law of 1994. The occupation, please clarify, that's not referring to the occupation of land?
No.
It's the occupation of business.
Yeah, thank you for the clarification. Definitely, it's about the right for you to walk in whatever you want, and the right for you to do any job that you want, to do, for example, to open your store and to work. That's the idea of the, yeah. Maybe sometimes my English is okay.
It's better than our Hebrew. So I'm just going to thank you. And I saw a very interesting question on the internet, and I want to end with this. This is a rapid fire question. If Moses walked into the room today, what would you say to him?
If Moses come to the day today, I said, you need to be proud, first of all. You see your Jewish people from 600,000 people that going get out of Egypt. We are now millions of people, more than 2,000, it's actually around 3,000 years ago, years later, and we still have a Jewish people. And we are the only one that survived all this time. And you know what? It's not only that we survived, we actually established Jewish state. And we established Jewish state that definitely have a lot of problems in the Jewish state. But you know what? Any state have problems. And if you look on the history, and that's why I like this question, because it's giving you the option to see in much wide angle. It's giving you the option to see in terms of thousands of years, we are in such a good spot. The Israeli people living their lives argue about their rules in their states, about how their state will look like. And that's something amazing. But if Moses will come, he will get in here. I'm not sure I think he will be amazed. He will be amazed. And you want me to close?
Yes, I'm afraid we're going to have to, but let me just say that if you want to hear more from him, there are flyers outside. He will be at the Bayit all of Shabbat if anyone is in the area. I understand he's speaking 3 times, and there's probably food almost every time. And also Monday at lunch, you're more than welcome to take another dive with us and hear more. Lots of questions we didn't get to. And so perhaps that'll be an opportunity. And I just want to thank you all for coming, and let us speak for close.
Thank you very much for coming, and all the people that in the webinar. And I just want to say one thing about it. I told you I'm really optimistic, even that we're actually fighting in the most the most conflict things in Israel and the things that's very problematic. And I think this is the way that we need to look on things. I think my organization, this is the way that we're doing. I have 400 volunteers, lawyers, but going all over and doing these things. And I will be very happy to be connect with anyone that wants to be connect with us and take part in what we are doing. And I want to thank you, Anita, and I thank you, Andrea, and all the organizations, the amazing organizations that helped me to come here and speak to you. And I think it's so important that people in Canada and people all over who cares about Israel. It's amazing to me to see every time that you are so caring and so Zionistic and enthusiastic about it. And so thank you for letting me to speak in front of you. Thank you.